Good morning. How are you doing? ሰላም ነው? እንዴት ነው? ሰላም ነው? Okay. Your performance in your first test was extraordinary. It's very nice. Your performance in your first online test is highly appreciated. Very good. And you're encouraged to continue your level of effort and dedication and commitment in the same way in the upcoming submissions, right? You'll continue to do the same in your future submission. It's very good and very nice. Today, what we're going to look into is basic concept in argument. What are basic concepts that we need to get ourselves familiar with concerning concepts arguments, right? Basic concepts such as identifying argument from argument, non-argumentative passage, and identifying terminologies that we shall employ to evaluate an argument, and classification of argument into inductive and deductive argument. What are the typical features? What are the typical characteristics is something that we're going to look into today. Now, what the content of this chapter: defined argument, non-argumentative passage, and inductive and deductive argument. And lastly, we will look into terminologies that we shall employ to evaluate an argument. An argument, in the strict sense of the term, cannot be evaluated as good or bad, right or wrong, acceptable, unacceptable, etc. Right? There are unique terminologies that we shall employ in order to evaluate an argument, right? So the objective of this particular session is aimed at to expose ourselves to those unique, particular terminology that we shall use in order to evaluate an argument. What's logic? Logic is about the evaluation of an argument. What's an argument? An argument is a collection of premise and conclusion. Everyone thinks, everyone reasons, everyone argues, everyone is subjected to reasoning. Right? Some people think well, and some people reason well, argue well, and some do not. So thinking, reasoning, arguing seems to be what? A matter of natural gift. But no matter it's a natural gift. So if it is a natural gift, why we want to study argument? Why we want to study logic? If it's a natural gift, then it's already inscribed, written down in our genetics, in our natural ability. So why we want to study it? It's already done. Why? Because your name, Khalid what? Mustafa Muhammad, right? Yes, Khalid Mustafa Muhammad. If it's already natural gift, then why we spend our time in studying about argument? Yes. Because it makes better. Our natural ability can be refined. It can be molded. It can be shaped. No matter our natural ability to reason or to argue or to think, through the study of argument, we can refine it. We can change, we can modify it, or we can mold it, right? So the study of argument is to expose us to those principles that will help us to mold or refine our natural ability to think or to argue, right? To argue. Logic is, roughly speaking, the study of methods that will enable us to refine, to mold our natural ability. To better grab what logic is, we need to understand the K concept in logic. K concepts in logic are argument, conclusion, premise, etc., inference, etc. Right? This particular chapter is concerned with one of these concepts in logic, which is an argument, clarification of what argument is, more specifically to be able to identify argument from non-argumentative passage. What are the component part of an argument? What's an argument? What are the constituent part of an argument? Premise and conclusion. How many premises a single argument can contain? One or more? Only one conclusion. Very good. Nice. A single argument cannot contain more than a single conclusion, but it can contain one or more premise. Arguments are composed of one or more premise and a conclusion. So an argument is a group of statements, one or more of which the premises are intended to prove or support another statement. A statement is a sentence that can be viewed as true or false. What's a statement? It's a declarative sentence that are viewed as true or false. 5 things should be considered about the nature of statement. 5 things should be considered about the nature of statement. The first thing is a sentence may be used to express more than one statement. A single sentence can be used to express more than one statement. For example, roses are red and violets are blue contains how many statements? 2 statements, right? Second thing that need to be considered about the nature of statement is a statement can sometimes be expressed as a phrase. It can be expressed as a phrase or an incomplete clause rather than complete declarative sentence. Look at the example. With a mortgage interest rate at 30 years low, you owe it to yourself to reconsider refinancing your home. Now, what is the implicit statement in this incomplete clause, in the first incomplete clause? With the mortgage interest rate at 30 years low, comma, it's what? It's an incomplete clause. What is the implicit statement? The statement is mortgage interest rate is low. Interest rate is low. Isn't it? It is a statement. Right? A statement can be expressed in an incomplete clause. The same thing is true for the second one. You owe it to yourself to reconsider refinancing your home. There is an implicit statement in that incomplete clause in the form of advice, right? So a statement can be expressed in an incomplete clause, incomplete phrase or in an incomplete clause. The third is the statement. Not all sentences are statements because questions, proposals, exclamations, suggestions are not statements, right? Questions, proposal, exclamations, suggestions, in their crude form are not statements, but in the implicit or rhetorical purpose, they can be considered as a statement, right? Questions and exclamations, proposal can be considered as a statement. We'll come to that point later on. How questions and proposals can be considered as a statement, right? The first statement can be subjective matter of fact, subjective personal opinion, or objective verifiable matter of fact. Subjective matter, such as I believe that chocolate ice cream is the most delicious flavor, is subjective, whereas the earth revolves around the sun is an objective matter of fact. It's an objective because it affects everyone who engages in observing or in experimenting or in verifying, right? Subjective matter of fact is something which is confined to the person who is feeling, who is engaging in a confined particular subjectivity, right? The last thing that needs to be considered about the nature of statement is some sentence that looks like non-statement, which is related to the fourth one, right? I mean the third one. We have said that questions, proposals, exclamations, suggestions are not statements, which is related to this principle. The fifth one, some sentence that looks like non-statement are actual statement, and they can be used in an argument. Now look at the example. Alicia, you should quit smoking. Don't you realize how bad that is for your health? What kind of sentence is it? It's a question, right? But it can be taken as statement. can be taken as a statement. Why? Why? Yes, what's your name? Khalid what?
Khalid Zain.
Khalid Zain, very good. Why? Why it's considered as statement?
Because we can't say either
Because
we can't say either it's true.
true or false, yes. What else? Your name? Yes. Yes? Khalid. Yes. Khalid Mulatu? Yes, very good. Why do you think it is considered as an indirect statement? Directly, it's not a statement, but it's an indirect statement. Why? Alicia, should quit smoking? Don't you realize how bad it's for your health? It's directly caution, but it's not. It's not. It's a caution, but indirectly it's a statement because the purpose, the aim, the objective, is not asking questions, not seeking to try to get information, but to assert something. The purpose is what? To persuade the audience, not to get information out of these particular questions, right? Such kind of question is known as rhetorical questions. They are not direct questions, but they are indirect statements, indirect rhetorical questions. But the aim is to persuade or to influence others, not to get information out of them, right? Rhetorical questions, right? We will come across such kind of sentence more specifically when we look into the nature of the informal fallacies in the 4th chapter. Don't confuse. They are not questions or exclamation, but they are indirect or rhetorical expressions, right? So sentence that looks like non-statement are actually statements. Identifying premise and conclusion is one of the tasks that we shall encounter in this particular chapter. The first technique that we shall employ to identify premise from the conclusion is using indicator words, conclusion indicators, and premise indicators. Indicator words are one method to be able to identify premise. Premise indicators include such as since, because, for, given that, seeing that, considering that, in as much as, in view of the facts as indicated by, judging from, on account of. Conclusion indicators, therefore, thus, hence, consequently, so accordingly, it follows that for this reason, that is why, which show thus, wherefore, this implies that, as a result, this suggests that, this being so, we may infer that. If a statement comes after either one of these words, then we can conclude that it's what? Conclusion, right? If a statement that comes after the premise indicator, then we can get a clue, source of information to infer that particular statement is a premise, right? But they are not guarantee. They are not guarantee to consider the statement as a premise or a conclusion. They give us only what? Clues. C-L-U-E-S. Clues or source of information. We need to make secondary investigation. We need to make secondary investigations. We need to ask yourself other important questions, right? Note that the existence of indicator can never be guaranteed for a sentence to be premise or conclusion for argument. Consider, for example, argument. I have seen you since high school, you have had that jacket for as long as I have known you. Thus far, everything has been great. It was so cold that even the Sky Resort shut down. It wouldn't mind seeing that movie again. There's water on the floor because the things overflow. Now, what is indicator word in the first sentence? I have seen the word since. In the second, the word for. In the third, thus. In the fifth, so. The sixth, the italicized. Is seeing that, right? Seeing that is a premise indicator. And there is a water on the floor because the sink overflowed. The word because is a premise indicator. The mere existence of indicator does not guarantee for a passage to be an argument or for a sentence to be a statement or the conclusion. We need to make secondary investigation. Even sometimes we may come across a passage that lacks indicator word at all. No indicator word at all. No premise indicator, no conclusion indicator, and you might be asked to identify which one is premise and which one is a conclusion. Now, read this passage, please. What is your name? Kamal Isaac Abdu. Yes, I think you have created repeated account, right?
Yeah.
But you need to use consistently one account. You need to forget the others, right?
Yes.
And account, yes, and account. Read the passage. Achieving financial success.
Hello?
Achieving, yes, read it louder.
Achieving financial success is not solely determined by individual effort. There are systematic inequalities, economic downturns, and unpredictable market forces that can hinder one's ability to succeed.
Succeed, yes.
Additionally, personal circumstances such as family background, access to education, and social network also play a
Significant role. Thank you very much. Now, is there any indicator word? Is there any premise indicator or conclusion indicator? No indicator. But we can tell which one is the premise and which one is the conclusion. We need to use our own techniques. What are those techniques? In the absence of indicators, what techniques can we use? What is your name? Kedistman Alam? Asnatius, yes. What technique can we use? If there is no premise indicator, no conclusion indicator, you are asked which one is the premise and which one is the conclusion. The first technique is Khalid Ishaq. Kamal Ishaq, yes.
by understanding the passage.
By understanding the passage. Yes, by understanding the main message of the author or the writer. Very good. What else? If there is no premise indicator, no conclusion indicator, what techniques can we use? ቅድስት ማንደፍሮ ቅድስት ማንደፍሮ or father name Mandafro. Yes, very good. What technique can we use? By? Cause effect. Very good. Very nice. What else? Cause effect is for explanations. Argumentative passages are not explanatory passages. Yes. Kibrom, what technique?
We can bring out what the sentence would convey.
Yes. We can ask questions what the passage is trying to convey, trying to transfer. Very good. What else? What the passage is trying to transfer or trying to convey is a kind of question that you need to ask yourself. What else? The first immediate technique is to look into the first part of the passage or the last part of the passage. Why? Because it is the place where the conclusion lies. First part and last part. Where mainly the conclusion lies. Not always, but mainly the first part and the last part is where the conclusion lies, right? And to ask, to implicitly insert the word therefore or because before various statements. Implicitly or mentally, you can insert the word therefore or because before various statements and ask yourself if it makes sense in relation to the statement that comes after it. In relation to the statement that comes after it, right? So this add technique that we shall use in order to identify the passage, the conclusion, the argument. Find the main issues, as Kibrom says, the main issues, and ask yourself what position the writer or speaker is asking. Look at the beginning or the end of the passage. The conclusion is often, but not always, found in one of those places. Ask yourself what is the writer or the speaker trying to prove, and trying to put the word therefore. Therefore trick and because trick. The last two bullets are related. Therefore trick to identify the conclusion, and the because trick is to identify the premise, right? Implicitly inserting the word therefore or because before various statements, and ask yourself which one is logically related to the other in relation to its previous or the statement that comes after it. To understand argument, we need to understand what argument is not. To understand argumentative passage, though roughly, it's crucial, very important to understand what argument is not. 5 types of non-argumentative discourse that sometimes confuse this argument and that we mostly encounter in our day-to-day activities. When we are reading newspaper, magazines, or an editorial, or a scientific journal, or etc., we encounter a kind of passage that we can confuse with argumentative passage. But they lack something. They lack some element that must be fulfilled for a passage to be an argument, right? Mostly we encounter report, unsupported assertions, loosely associated statement, expository passage, conditional statement, illustration, and explanations. They're all non-argumentative passage. They are not argument. What do they lack? What element? They lack. Report, the aim of a report is what? To inform the reader, to report, to convey information, not to argue. Right? The aim of a report. Get it. Yes, please. The aim of a report is to convey information. It's not to argue or to prove something. قدست ماندفرو كينا مرقا Yes, read it louder, please. Example, wildlife conservation.
A wildlife conservation report states that migration of tigers, tears, passenger
protect the remaining tiger population. Very good. It's what? A report. It's not argument. Why? The purpose is not to prove, but to transfer information. Right? Report and expository passages are very much related, but slightly different. Reports and expository passages are related, but they're not exactly the same, right? Report is to transfer the information, and expository passage is to add up on and to expand the topic sentence. We'll come to that point later on. Report is not argument. Unsupported assertions are not argument. The name itself tells us something about its nature. Unsupported. It's not augmented. It's not supported by evidence, by reason. Just simply to convey one's belief and opinion, right? Now look at the example. The best way to understand argument is to look into example. Kebrom. Yes, what is your name? Kadis. Mulukan. Boggala. Read the example. I believe that.
I believe that it is not dying that people are afraid of. Something else, something more unsettling and more tragic than dying frightens us. We are afraid of never having lived, of coming to the end of our days with the sense that we were never really alive, that we never figured out
what life was for. It is what? Unsupported assertion. The writer or the speaker of this particular passage is just expressing what he tended to believe without supporting with evidence or reason. Right? Unsupported assertions are not arguments, just simple expression of what one happened to believe, without supporting with evidence, right? If there were additional evidence in order to augment his belief, that could have been considered as an argument, right? Unsupported assertions are not argument. Loosely associated statements are not argument. Most of them are self-explanatory. The name itself tells us about their essence. Loosely associated statement means they lack clear logical argumentative structure. They are loose. We cannot detect a kind of coherent structure or organizations between statements, right? But they talk about some fundamental common stuff. But even though they talk about some fundamental common stuff, they lack structures. They are loosely associated. And you're hiking the mountain, the fresh air and beautiful view are invigorating. My favorite color is blue. It reminds me of the ocean and brings a sense of calm. Yesterday I tried a new recipe. It was a spicy curry dish that had a unique blend of flavor. Three of them are talking about entirely different subjects, but they do have some common element. They are talking about one's personal preference, right? One's personal, like or dislike of something, right? But they are loosely associated because they talking about entirely different subject, right? Loosely associated statement, they cannot be considered as an argument. Expository passage, we have said they are related to report, but they are slightly different from report. The name itself tells us about its essence. What's to expose means to add up on, to expand the topic sentence, not to prove it. The aim is not to prove it. Read the example. The Industrial Revolution. What is your name? Alamayu, yes. The Industrial Revolution.
Industrial revolution which took place from the late 80s to the early 90th century brought about significant change in society. It made a shift from
Agrarian.
moral labor based economics to industrialize and the machine-driven production herself the development of new technologies such as steam power and mechanized textile product, which revolutionized manufacturing process, factories emerging, and urbanization accelerated as people migrate from rural areas to work in industrial center. The industrial revolution had profound social, economic, and impact, transforming the way people
Lived and worked. Very good. Is it an argument? It's not an argument. It's what? Expository passage. Expository passage contains a topic sentence, which is the main idea of the passage, and the other statement or sentence is aimed at adding upon or expanding the topic sentence. Expanding topic sentence. What is the topic sentence? The Industrial Revolution? Yes. The Industrial Revolution what? Brought about significant change. That's the topic sentence, the main idea of this passage. Right? All the other sentences or statements are aimed at expanding that topic sentence. Expanding or adding upon information about the change take place during the Industrial Revolution. It's not to prove it. It's not to prove it, but to add upon. It aims to add upon or expand the topic sentence. Expository passages are related to the report, but they are slightly different than report, right? The same thing is true for conditional statement. They lack inference. They are not argument. But unlike the previous one, conditional statements are very much tricky because they seem to contain an inference or a procedure, a reasoning from the statement to the conclusion, but it's not a reasoning. It's not a reasoning, but putting certain condition as a precondition for something else to happen, right? Conditional statement is an if-then statement. Conditional statement consists of two parts, namely what? Antecedent and consequent. The antecedent is the part of the conditional that comes after if. The consequent is the part of the conditional that comes after then. Conditional statement traditionally has been expressed in the form of if-then. In their modern appearance, they can be expressed in the absence of if-then structure. Should it rain, the picnic will be cancelled. In the event of rain, the picnic will be cancelled. Peter will graduate provided he passes the critical thinking. Are all conditional, even though we cannot see an if-then statement in them. In their modern expression, conditional statement can be expressed in the form of if-then, right? The relation between conditional statement and argument can be summarized in three bullets. The first is a single conditional statement can never be taken as an argument. A conditional statement may serve as either the premise or the conclusion of an argument, or both premise and condition and conclusion can be conditional statement. Inferential content of conditional statement can be expressed to form an argument. They can be rewritten or they can be re-expressed to form an argument. And you have to take into consideration, specifically more concerning the third bullet, a conditional statement can be expressed when to form an argument? When a single conditional statement can be re-expressed or it can be rewritten to form an argument. When the condition of the antecedent is necessary for the consequent. That is the only condition, right? If the antecedent is sufficient for the consequent, or if the antecedent is both necessary or sufficient for the consequent, or if the antecedent is neither necessary nor sufficient for the consequent, a conditional statement can never be expressed to form an argument. The only condition, a single conditional statement can be expressed to form an argument is when the antecedent is necessary. Antecedent condition is only a necessary condition for its consequent, right? You need to remember this rule, right? Before trying to express a conditional statement to form an argument. What is necessary condition, sufficient condition? Both necessary or neither necessary or sufficient is something that we'll come to later on, right? So let's summarize these three rules, the relation between a conditional statement and argument by looking at the example. A single conditional statement is not an argument. If it rains, I will bring an umbrella. It's a single conditional statement. It can never be taken as an argument. Second rule, if you study consistently, you will perform well on the exam. Therefore, if you study consistently, it can be taken as an argument. It can be taken as an argument, according to the second rule. Conditional statement can serve as a premise or both premise and conclusion or a conclusion of an argument, right? So the second example can be considered as an argument. The inferential content of a conditional statement can be rewritten to form an argument. For example, if you exercise regularly, you will improve your fitness. The re-expressed argument is what? Since regular exercise leads to improved fitness, it is advisable to incorporate exercise into your routing. It can be taken as an argument. All you have to do is to cancel out the if-then structure and rewrite it in the form of argument, right? But the first thing that you need to be aware is that if the antecedent is necessary for the consequent, if the antecedent is sufficient for the consequence, don't try to re-express, don't try to rewrite it, right? So the first thing that you make sure for yourself is whether the antecedent is necessary for the consequent. What does it mean? Antecedent is necessary or sufficient condition for the consequent. Condition A is said to be necessary for condition B if the falsity or non-existence or non-occurrence of A brings about the falsity or non-existence or non-occurrence of B. A condition A is said to be sufficient for condition B if the truth or the existence of A guarantees or brings about the truth or existence or occurrence of B. Right? The relation between antecedent and consequent can form four relations. The relation between the two conditions must be exactly one of these four possibilities. The first possibility is first necessary condition, but not sufficient condition for the second. The first condition, which is the antecedent, is sufficient but not necessary condition for the second. The third is the antecedent is both necessary and sufficient condition for the consequent. And the last one is the antecedent is neither necessary nor sufficient for the consequent, right? Let's look at examples. Having a driver license is necessary but not sufficient for operating commercial vehicle. Why? It's necessary and why it's not sufficient. Having driver license is necessary but not sufficient for operating commercial vehicle. If X is necessary for Y, then the existence of Y is impossible without X. If X is sufficient for Y, then X guarantees Y, but we can think of Y without X. There are other factors that makes the existence of Y possible without X. Maybe. If X is necessary for Y, X is absolutely needed for Y. If X is sufficient for Y, X may not be absolutely needed. If X is sufficient for Y, X may not be absolutely needed. We can think of other factors that make the existence of Y possible other than X, if X is sufficient. Right? So having driving license is necessary but not sufficient for operating commercial vehicles, because we cannot think of operating a commercial vehicle without having a driver license. But it cannot be sufficient because it does not guarantee. It does not guarantee, or it does not bring about the existence of operating commercial vehicle without having driver license. Owning smartphone is sufficient but not necessary for accessing the internet. By smartphone, we mean the physical with its networking abilities, right? Owning smartphone is what? Only sufficient condition for accessing the internet. Why it's only sufficient? Yes, Khalid.
Because we can access the internet
With other devices. If we have smartphone, we can access the internet. It guarantees internet. But we can think of other factors that makes the possibility of accessing the internet without smartphone. Sufficient condition means X brings about Y, but without X, we can think of the possibility of Y, the existence of Y, right? So smartphone, owning a smartphone is only sufficient, not necessary, right? We can think of a condition in which the antecedent is both necessary and sufficient condition for the consequent. Look at the example. Today's big neither Saturday nor Sunday is what? Both necessary and sufficient. Why? You can explain this. Today, being neither Saturday nor Sunday is both necessary and sufficient condition. For today being weekday, from Monday to Friday. Would like to offer an explanation for this. Yes, your name is your name? Kalkidan what? Gitaun, yes. Why do you think? Today, being neither Saturday nor Sunday is both necessary and sufficient condition for today being a weekday.
Because it's not necessary to say a weekday, because weekday is from Monday to Friday.
Yes.
So it's not necessary and sufficient for to being Saturday and Sunday.
It's not necessary. It's necessary, right? It's necessary. It's both necessary. Today being neither Saturday nor Sunday is both necessary and sufficient. Why? Because the antecedent is absolutely needed for the consequent. Antecedent is absolutely needed. We cannot think of the consequent without the antecedent. At the same time, we can think of other factors that make the consequent possible without the antecedent. We can think of other factors that makes possible the consequent without the antecedent. Right? There are certain conditions in which the antecedent can be both necessary and sufficient conditions, right? You need to be aware of this condition. We can think of other days rather other than neither Saturday or Sunday, right? We can think of other days. Wearing sunglasses is neither necessary nor sufficient condition for rain. Which condition is it? Neither necessary nor sufficient. We cannot detect any logical relation at all. No logical relation at all. Being rich is blank condition for being happy. Necessary, sufficient, both, neither, right? Being rich, no relations. Being tall is a blank condition for being successful footballer. Is there any logical relation between physically tall and no relation, right? Some relations lacks no logical relations, right? Being tall. Being square is a blank condition to have foresight. Being square is a blank condition to have foresight. Necessary or sufficient? Sufficient, right? Square is just one factor. We can think of other factors that makes the existence of foresight other than square. It's only sufficient. It's only sufficient. Having square is sufficient condition for having foresight. But what if we switch foresight and square? Having foresight is a blank condition to have a square. Only necessary. Only necessary, right? If a condition P is only sufficient for condition Q, then if we switch the place of the antecedent, the consequent, it could have been the opposite meaning, right? If P is necessary for Q, then Q is sufficient for P, right? So you can think of the same examples in order to answer these questions. These are the questions that are included in your online test. These are questions included in your online test in chapter 2 to be submitted by next week. By next week, all you have to do is to ask yourself what relation do they have. Is it only sufficient or only necessary, or both sufficient and necessary, or neither sufficient nor necessary? That questions are already included in your online test together with some additional questions, right? Some other additional questions. Understanding conditional statement without sufficient necessary condition is impossible. Illustrations are not argument. Conditional statements are not argument. Same thing is true for illustrations. They are not argument. What's the illustrate means? What is a passage of illustrative passage? The aim of illustrative passage. Illustrative passages are aimed at what? Demonstrating, showing the subject in question by what? By bringing examples, right? So you can find typical expressions such as, for example, for an instance, right? Illustrative passages are characterized by the existence of such expression. For instance, for example, or etc. Regular exercise contributes to overall physical well-being. For example, engaging in aerobic exercise such as jogging, cycling, etc., improve cardiovascular health. The same thing is true for the other passage, right? It's aimed at bringing examples, bringing instances that shows the subject in question. The subject in question is regular exercise contribute to overall physical well-being, right? Illustrative passage lack inference in them, but they're aimed at showing, demonstrating, illustrating the subject in question without trying to prove it. For instance, for example, etc. Explanations are very much similar to argumentative passage. Explanations, they contain indicator word, and even the reasoning process seems to be similar to argument, but they are not argument. Explanation are not argument. What's the first immediate technique that will help us to identify explanation from argument? Yes, explanations are about widely known facts, whereas arguments are not about widely known facts. It's about something which is less known. Less known. Look at the example. Capital punishment should be abolished because innocent people may be mistakenly executed. Titanic sank because it struck an iceberg. Which one is an explanation and which one is an argument, and why? Khalid. Titanic sank, is it explanation or argument? Explanation. Why? Because it's widely known fact. It's a historical event. Whereas the first one, a capital punishment should be abolished because innocent people may be mistakenly executed. It's an argument. Why? Convince us about some subject matter which is somehow controversial in its nature, which is somehow open for controversy. Capital punishment should be abolished. There are a significant number of people who maintain that it should be abolished, and there are a significant number of people it should not be abolished, right? It is arguable, controversial, right? Arguments are concerned with some controversial issues, whereas explanations are with certain empirical facts. Titanic sank because it struck an iceberg is an explanation, right? Nobody is controversial about its historical events, right? So explanations, even though they contain such indicator words, but they are not argument, but because they're mainly concerned with certain issues which are empirical in its nature. Sometimes we will have different explanation for why something is the case. If we are engaging in opting for which explanation outweighs the other, we are making an argument, right? A single explanation may not be taken as an argument, but a collection of explanation in which we are trying to choose which explanation is preferable over the other. Then the entire explanation can be considered as an argument. Right? Single explanation in itself cannot be an argument, but if we come across a collection of explanation in which we are trying to choose which one is preferable, which one outweighs the other, then the entire passage can be taken as an argument. Now look at the example. The car will not start. That's the conclusion. The first explanation why the car will not start. The car will not start because the battery is dead. The second explanation, the car will not start because there is a problem with the ignition system. Argument, the car will not start, and the explanation that outweighs the other is that the battery is dead. Right? Such kind of argument is known as an inference to the best explanation. inference is the best explanations, right? A collection of explanations in which we are trying to select which one is preferable over the other. The entire passage can be taken as an argument, right? But the single explanation in itself cannot be taken as an argument, right? We're trying to choose which one is preferable over the others, right? In this example, there are two different explanations. Given why the car will not start, explanation one attributes the problem to dead battery, while explanation suggests that the problem with the ignition system. The argument is made to determine which explanation carries more weight, right? So entirely the passage can be taken as an argument, right? And sometimes an explanation can itself be the conclusion of an argument. Sometimes an explanation can be taken as the conclusion of an argument. The ground is wet, it has been raining heavily, therefore the wet ground is the result of heavy rainfall. The conclusion is an explanation, and therefore it can be taken as a component part of the argument together with other non-explanatory statements, right? It can be taken as the conclusion of an argument, right? Explanation has two parts, namely explanandum and explanans. The statement that does the explaining is the explanans, and the explanandum is something that needs to be explained. We have four techniques that will be important to use in order to tell whether it's explanation or an argument. If the subject of the passage is the common knowledge, it's not explanation. If it's a past event test, just like the Titanic sank because it struck with an iceberg, it's not explanation. Historical events are not explanation. And the third thing that you need to ask yourself is what is the intent, the motivation of the author. Is he trying to explain something or trying to prove something? Is he trying to tell us something about which is controversial or tell us something which is scientifically or empirically verifiable known facts? What is the author or the intention of the author is something that you need to ask yourself. The principle of charity. What is that? Principle of charity is if the first three principles does not work for you, then you can use your own discretion, your own decision making, your own ability, right? It's also known as an inference to the best explanation. The principle of charity is the last method that we can use to tell whether a particular passage is argumentative passage or explanatory passage. Author intent test, the past event test, and the common knowledge test is not working, then you can use principle of charity test or use your own discretion or your decision ability, right?